What was maybe the biggest challenge that was presented going up against the Rams this past weekend, particularly in the passing game with Matthew Stafford?
Yeah, Ross, they had a really good plan. I thought they executed at a high level. They're a tough team to cover. I mean, when Matthew's playing like he is right now, and you've got 2 first-team All-Pro receivers, and one of them going to the Hall of Fame, and first-team All-Pro back. It's a tough group all the way around. And so I thought that there were plenty of good downs in the game, but then there was too many stretches where they beat us. And I think that gap of plays in there is going to be a great learning experience for our guys in terms of where we need to go with our game as a unit. But we definitely need to build on that performance and learn where we need to go here against Carolina.
They use a lot of 3 tight end sets, which isn't something we're used to seeing from Sean McVay, but he's ticked that up a bit this year. Just what kind of challenge does that present to an opponent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a part of their plan based on how the game was going when they got the lead. But yeah, anytime you add gaps in the run game, it helps you. That wasn't a primary part of their game plan against us. They're still an 11 team. But again, it's just him running all his normal plays just out of a different personnel grouping. That's what good coaches do. I think that group is going to give them a lot of variety down the stretch.
If you're trying to establish like a new culture, come into a new place, get it going on, you want to do what are the benchmarks you're looking at beyond like just yards, points? Like what's the stuff, the intangible things that maybe everyone doesn't see that you're looking for and looking to grow and like foster so you got the foundation.
Yeah, I think the silent tape is what our culture is all about, and I think our silent tape through this stretch of season, we're proud of that in terms of how physical we play, the effort that we play with, the physicality on blocks, the way that we tackle, and I think that's on the tape against some of the premier teams in the league. I think that we have played a premium offensive schedule so far, and I think that our group has put a lot of quality on the film. From a style of play standpoint. And then I think, from just a scheme perspective, what you're looking for is, are you executing the scheme? Are there mental errors all over the tape, or are you solid and they're beating you? And I think that we've been able to do that. You don't see a bunch of, catastrophic errors on tape where you're turning people loose and you're giving them easy plays, getting them easy first downs, easy explosions, easy touchdowns. And so I think that we can definitely build on that. And I think our group's playing together. And I think the other thing is you hope that your group is improving and they're developing. And I think that we can say that is true as well. So, again, great opportunity against Carolina to keep it going. We've got a good group of guys. And, again, last week, it's going to force us to respond this week. So it's going to be a good opportunity for our guys.
What's made Rico Dowdle good fit?
Yeah, he's playing as well as anybody in the league right now at the running back position. We've played against a lot of quality backs this year, and he's playing as well as any of them. The physicality, the decisiveness. I think he's a great fit for how they're trying to run the ball, but he's bringing a lot of personality on the contact, breaking a lot of tackles, running through a lot of quality players, and so he's definitely given them a style of play, and he's made their whole offense better, and they've also got a quality back in Chuba Hubbard, so they've got a very good 1-2 punch.
You see some of those checkpoints you were talking about, like with other teams you're building across the league, like the Panthers, for instance, they've trying to rebuild for a couple of years now. Do you see those improvements across the board?
For our team?
For Carolina specifically, some of those same checkpoints you were talking about, where you measure for your team, you kind of see similarities and what.
Yeah, I think any team that's going through a new phase, a new coaching staff, a new build, so to speak. You're trying to, I think to Nick's point, you're trying to establish your culture first and your style of play. And then as you onboard, more of, the people that fit what you do, then, some of those other things can take shape. And I think every build's different. Sometimes you hit it right away, sometimes, kind of in the middle, or sometimes later on. But you just want to make sure that you're playing the right way. And I think that that's what we're trying to focus on, certainly on the defensive side, is playing the right way and making sure we're playing team team defense. And, I think our group has done a good job of that all season, of playing the way that we want to play. And then if there are issues that we've had throughout the season, name a game or name a stretch where we've had to correct things, you want to make sure that you're making the adjustments. And so, I think when you're brand new, that's really important that you are meeting those benchmarks as you go.
You've worked with some really good defensive tackles throughout your career. What is unique about Bryan Bresee?
Yeah, I think probably his ability to play on all three downs. I think you don't have to take him off the field. There's some guys that are really good at stopping the run. There's some guys that are really good at rushing the passer, but I think that he can play on all three downs, and he can play with some versatility in where he can line up. But I think that probably what stands out for an interior D lineman is his pass rush ability. He can win in one-on-one pass rush, and I think that, that's hard to find in the NFL. Most of the rush production in this league comes outside. So when you can find an inside pass rusher, it is unique, and it's something that is an advantage for you. So he's been a big asset for our defense. I think he's improved, in huge ways in the run game. And I think that in the pass rush game, he's been one of our top assets in pass rush. He's had a lot of quick winners. He continues to improve. And, excited to see him continue to take his game where it can go.
Is there stuff you can do to develop leadership, or is that just kind of inherent in players and they kind of emerge on their own?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think it's a combination. I definitely think that you can foster it and develop it. There's some guys who, potentially they've had a good upbringing in it, in terms of where they've been before, whether it was college, high school, whatever. Maybe it's their family, but I think anytime a person sort of demonstrates the ability to affect others, you definitely want to tap into that. And some guys it's different than others. I was around Khalil Mack, who was very soft-spoken, and his example was the leadership. And everybody followed him, and it was his example, though. And then there's some other guys that talk a little bit more, and that are a little bit more active. And so everybody does it their own way. But what you try to do is those guys that can impact others, you want to pour into them as much as you can, so that they can see, their example, how impactful it can be.
Do you ever see guys go from being the leader that leads by example, and then they kind of, something happens and all of a sudden they become the guy that leads with their voice? Khalil
Mack's a good example, because as when I got him in LA with the Chargers, he was a much different guy. I was first with him in 2018, and he was 27 and on top of the world. And then when we traded for him, he had a family and he'd gone through a lot more experiences, so he was a lot more ready to lead. I think with his words, and more comfortable in doing so. So I think what you can't do is force, that. That's the type of leadership that doesn't ever hit the way you want it to, is when you're forcing something to happen. And but I think the more experiences that you get, and that doesn't mean you have to be older. You can be younger and have a ton of experience. But when that hits you, you know that you're ready for it, and then you just can let it fly.
John said last week that some of the growth you saw in Tyler was the way he handled the scout team, specifically the blitzes that you guys would handle up, draw from your upcoming opponent. I was just wondering kind of your perspective on that, of you're trying to scheme blitzes every week, making them look pretty, and then seeing how he adjusted to those and maybe the value in that for.
I think any time a young quarterback can feel what it's like in a tight pocket when he's up against it, I think it's such an advantage, because that's how the NFL is in the pocket for young players. And most of the time when you're brand new to the NFL, you're seeing things for the first time, and I think for it to happen in practice to you is an advantage before you actually have to go out there and do it. And so I thought the one thing that Tyler showed was the playmaking ability when the pocket was tight, whether he was in the pocket, climbing the pocket, or getting outside the pocket. I felt like he showed the playmaking ability against us and made some, what we would say are some major league throws, like some real NFL throws. And he made it tough on us, for his time on the scout team. So we saw the progress, and, I thought last week that you saw the same things that he had done against us in practice. You saw some of that in the game versus the Rams.
Yeah, did any of his progress or anything make you go back kind of to the drawing board and thought you wanted to adjust or anything? Is there anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that one thing that you can get is the feedback of, did he really see it? Did we give away something that kind of tipped him off to maybe change a protection, or maybe, hey, did he undress a disguise where he knew where he had a matchup and went there? Those are things that you can get the feedback from the player, and I think that those are things that he improved at every week as he saw more defense. I think he himself became more confident in what he was looking at.
What's the protocol of communication on that? Like, do you go to him and ask him those kinds of questions, or does he share that with somebody else?
Yeah, it's happening in real time as it's happening. Maybe it's in between a period. Maybe it's after practice and stuff like that when he's working on his own. And maybe it's during just the meeting time in between. But that you're hoping for that communication both ways, because that's how you make each other better.
When you're kind of drives in the game, obviously coming out of halftime in particular, I think it was 10 minutes. Like, what do you think kind of led to that, and how do you assess that as you look back on how the players handled it? Obviously being on the field that much in the second half is a difficult scenario.
Yeah, there's a couple components there. I thought we forced them to drive the field, which is a good thing. That's a positive. There weren't the rippers. They just get you beat that you can't recover from. But I thought that there were a lot of little things from a fundamental standpoint and from an execution scheme-wise that led to, a lot of those first downs. But I thought our group hung in there. And still, 43 or 44 minutes, that's a bunch of ball. And I thought our guys hung tough. If you looked at the run numbers, there was 44 runs, but 4 yards per run, you're probably going to take that, a lot in a lot of games. If that was 20 to 22 runs in a game at that same clip, you'd be saying we had a really good day at the office. So I thought that was positive. But I think that where we need to improve is how we start the games, and then when we get into an advantage situation within those drives, which there were plenty of them, we need to be able to knock them down, especially when you're playing against a special quarterback and a special group of guys. A 2nd and 15, you got to keep that advantage. You can't make that 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. We had a couple of those in there. We had a big 3rd and 8 after we got that 3 and out. Then we get them to a 3rd and 8, and we don't get off the field, and we were in a kind of a prime coverage to do so. So I think our guys are seeing those margins there when you're playing against the special people. That's within our control. And I think that our guys will learn a lot from it, like I said, and be ready to bounce back this week.
When you're kind of like scouting for ideas, do you look at teams that are like structurally similar to yours, or is it like all kinds of different schemes, or like what's kind of your process for like watching the league?
Yeah, I think, we really try to watch offenses, more than anything, because you learn a lot more, I think, by what you have to defend as opposed to looking at another defense. I think more innovation comes that way because it tells you what you need to be doing, as opposed to, sort of looking at another defense. It's like, no, let the offense tell us what we need to design. At least that's the way I approach it. There are some guys, that I'm a fan of in this league for sure. There's plenty of defenses that play at a high level, and we do that too. And there's plenty of examples of it. Certainly I was with Vic, and, there's some other guys that I've coached with that, I'm a big fan of that, we coach together. Now they're doing their own way. But I think more than anything, you got to study offensive scheme, to truly, I think, innovate and take your own defensive scheme to where it can go. And so,
like problem solving is how you kind of come up with.
Yeah, that's right.
The offense guys are the thieves that watch everyone in.
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
Stafford's time to throw last week was a little bit longer than his normal season average. I'm wondering how you kind of process that. Is that kind of the goal to have him keep it longer, or James has to get the ball out so fast?
He does.
Just kind of
Yeah, there's a lot of keepers in there. There's a lot of play pass, and when you're looking at true drop back, that's much different than, they're not factoring that into the average time to throw. If you just isolate the drop back, non-play action, non-keeper, it's going to be a lot less than that. Going into the game, he's one of the top ball out quarterbacks. He's a guy that kills pressure. Because of that, because the ball's out. So, I think basically, where we fell short in the game was our first drive wasn't good enough, and I think that set us into, it really disrupted our rhythm. And like I said, we had our opportunities to get control of that game in those following possessions, and we just didn't do it. And it was a lot of little things, and they were operating at a premium level. He hit a bunch of throws like that throw to Puka. It's a major league throw. We're right there. And he made a good play, and so did Puka. But I think that we saw how sharp you need to be. We need to be sharper all the way around, coaching and playing to beat that team.
Those little things you mentioned, particularly on that 10-minute drive, can those things be a product of being on the field for a long time and being tired and falling into bad habits, or is it something more like solid on practice tape and it needs to be corrected?
Yeah, Catherine, I think you make a great point. I think it's both. I mean, there's a reality of being on the field for a long stretch, and but then there's that part of being a competitor where there's you're out, there's no excuse. I think that our guys saw where we had control, that we could have affected, whether it was our technique or the execution of the scheme, where we needed to be better, and that's the truth. We needed to play better in that game. In that 10-minute drive, I think our guys hung in there, but in order to make the plays that get you off the field or get the takeaway that turns the momentum, we needed to be sharper, and we're all in it together and doing better this week for sure.
What are some of the challenges that Carolina presents if you
Yeah, I think Dave's doing a really good job tying the run game together. I think that, both backs are having prolific years. I think their O-line and their tight end group does a really good job blocking. They're definitely in sync. These runners aren't doing it on their own. They're doing it with the help of a group that's tied together. And then I think at the quarterback position, I think that Bryce is a point guard. He's a playmaker. They've got a lot of young weapons that are new to the NFL, a lot of young players that have really dynamic quality as a group. And so, they went into Green Bay on the road and just had a huge win and played the right way in order to get it done. So they're playing with a lot of confidence. And right now, I think as an offensive team, they've created an identity, and that's a compliment.